What if the one who saved your life disappeared, and you never got the chance to say goodbye? Jake Carter had asked himself that question every single day for the past 6 years. The late afternoon sun filtered through the blinds of his small apartment as he sat on the couch, staring at an old, worn-out photograph. In it, a younger version of himself knelt beside a strong, alert German shepherd with deep brown eyes. His military dog, Max. Jake ran a thumb over the image, exhaling slowly. 6 years. It had been 6 long years since he had last seen him. He never got to say goodbye. Jake had spent most of his military career overseas, deployed in high-risk zones where trust was scarce, but loyalty meant everything. Max had been his partner, his protector, and in many ways, his best friend. The German shepherd had saved his life more times than he could count, detecting IEDs before they could detonate, standing guard while Jake tried to catch rare moments of sleep, and once, even shielding him from gunfire. And then, just like that, they were separated. After their final mission together, Jake had been honorably discharged due to injuries, while Max, still active and fit for service, had been reassigned. No one told Jake where he was being sent. No matter how many calls he made or emails he sent, the response was always the same: classified. He tried everything to track Max down: letters to former commanders, appeals to military dog adoption programs, even reaching out to fellow veterans who might have seen him. But every lead turned into a dead end. Eventually, he had to accept the harsh truth. Max was gone. But that tiny ember of hope had never truly died. And now, his phone was ringing. Jake blinked at the unknown number flashing on the screen. His instinct was to ignore it. Probably another spam call. But something in his gut told him to answer. Hello? His voice was cautious, unsure. Is this Sergeant Jake Carter? The voice on the other end was firm but polite, with the clipped professionalism of someone used to delivering important news. Yeah? Who's asking? There was a pause. Then, 5 words that made his breath catch in his throat. We've found your dog, Max. Jake sat up so fast that his coffee cup nearly toppled off the table. His grip on the phone tightened. What? His voice came out hoarse. The caller continued. Max was retired from active service last year. He was placed in a military kennel awaiting adoption, but somehow, he slipped through the system. One of our contacts just confirmed that he's still available. If you're willing, Sergeant Carter, you can bring him home. Jake's heart pounded against his ribs. His mouth went dry. This couldn't be real. Where is he? He whispered. Base Camp Fort Bragg. He's waiting for you. Jake didn't remember hanging up. He barely remembered standing. All he knew was one thing. He was going to get his dog back. The miles passed in a blur as Jake Carter drove toward Fort Bragg, his hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. His mind wasn't in the present. It was 6 years in the past, replaying the moments that had defined his bond with Max. It had started in a dusty training field overseas, where a younger, more hardened Jake had been assigned a new partner, a military working dog with sharp instincts and an even sharper gaze. Meet Max, his commanding officer had said, handing Jake the leash. He's one of the best we've got. Treat him right, and he'll have your back. At first, Jake had been skeptical. He had worked with other dogs before, but none had ever been his dog. Max, however, wasn't like the others. He wasn't just a tool for the mission. He was something more. Their first few weeks together had been a test of patience. Max was disciplined, trained to perfection, but he had a stubborn streak. He followed orders flawlessly, but he also had a mind of his own. One day, while out on patrol, Max suddenly stopped, his ears twitching, body stiff. Jake had ignored it at first, thinking the dog was just distracted. He was wrong. Seconds later, an IED hidden beneath the sand was discovered, right where they had been about to step. Max had saved their entire unit that day, and from that moment forward, Jake never questioned him again. Their connection only deepened after that. Max wasn't just his assigned dog. He became Jake's shadow, his protector in the most unforgiving places. On sleepless nights, when the weight of war pressed down on him, Max would sit beside him, steady and strong, as if silently telling him, I'm here. And then there was the ambush. Jake could still feel the chaos of that night. The sudden gunfire, the adrenaline surging through his veins as he and his unit scrambled for cover. In the midst of the chaos, he remembered shouting Max's name, desperately searching for him. The sound of barking cut through the bullets, and Jake turned just in time to see Max launching himself at an enemy combatant, giving Jake the seconds he needed to fire. That moment sealed their bond forever. Max had saved his life, and then, not long after, they were separated. Jake had assumed he would be able to adopt Max after his discharge, but when he put in the request, he was met with a cold, bureaucratic response. Max was still fit for duty. He would be reassigned. It had felt like losing a brother. Now, 6 years later, as Jake's car sped down the highway, he clenched his jaw. The thought of seeing Max again, of looking into those deep brown eyes and knowing he was finally coming home, sent a wave of emotions through him. Jake inhaled sharply, steadying himself. He wasn't just going to see Max again. He was going to bring him home. The transition from military life to civilian life had never been easy for Jake Carter. War changed people, sometimes in ways they didn't fully understand until much later. The days of routine, discipline, and constant purpose were replaced by long, empty hours in a quiet apartment that felt too still, too normal. He had learned to live with the silence, but he had never learned to live with the absence of Max. For years, he tried to adapt. He got a job working security for a private firm, something that kept him busy, but never quite fulfilled. The camaraderie of the military was gone, replaced with the polite, distant professionalism of coworkers who didn't share his past. Nights were the hardest. He'd wake up to the phantom sensation of Max lying by his bedside, only to open his eyes and find nothing but darkness. The PTSD was manageable, but only just. Some nights, the memories of explosions and gunfire pulled him under like waves, and the only thing that used to anchor him was Max's steady presence. He remembered how Max would nuzzle against him when nightmares crept in, his warm breath a reminder that he wasn't alone. Without him, the nightmares felt more real, more suffocating. Jake had tried to find Max in the beginning. He wrote letters, made calls, reached out to every military adoption program he could find, but each time, he hit the same dead end. Classified, reassigned, no information available. He wanted to believe that Max was in good hands, but the uncertainty gnawed at him. He had seen too many military dogs given years of loyal service only to end up lost in the system, forgotten after their duty was done. Some were adopted by strangers, others placed in kennels indefinitely, waiting for a home they might never get. The thought of Max sitting in some cold, lonely cage, wondering where Jake was, made him sick. Eventually, he stopped searching, not because he stopped caring, but because it hurt too much to keep hoping. Time dulled the pain, but it never truly erased it. The framed photograph of Max remained on his bedside table, collecting dust, but never moving. His dog tag still hung on the doorknob, a small piece of his past that he refused to tuck away. He told himself that he had to move on, that some things just weren't meant to be. But in the quiet moments, when the world slowed down and his thoughts grew louder, he still whispered a silent prayer. Wherever you are, Max, I hope you're okay. And then, just like that, the call had come. The impossible had become real. Now, as he neared the base where Max was waiting, Jake realized something. The void he had been living with for 6 years wasn't just about missing a dog. It was about missing a part of himself. And soon, he was about to get that part back. Jake Carter gripped the steering wheel as he pulled up to the gates of Fort Bragg. His heart pounded harder than it ever had, even in combat. He had faced gunfire, explosions, and life-or-death situations, but nothing had ever prepared him for this moment. Would Max remember him? Would the 6 years apart have erased the bond they once shared? A soldier at the entrance checked his ID, gave him a quick nod, and waved him through. A few minutes later, he arrived at the military kennel, a fenced-in area where retired service dogs were housed until they found permanent homes. Stepping out of the car, Jake inhaled deeply, his hands slightly trembling. He had spent so many years searching for answers, so many nights wondering where Max was, and now in just a few moments, he would see him again. A woman in military fatigues approached him, a kind but professional expression on her face. "Sergeant Carter?" "Yes," Jake answered, his voice hoarse. She smiled. "Follow me." Jake's boots crunched against the gravel as they walked toward a large gated enclosure. A row of kennels lined the far end of the area, but Jake wasn't paying attention to anything except the figure standing by the fence. There he was, Maximum. His fur was a little grayer around the muzzle, his body leaner than Jake remembered. But those deep brown eyes, the ones Jake had never forgotten, were the same. Jake's breath caught in his throat. For a moment, neither of them moved. Max stared at him, his ears perking up slightly. Then something clicked. Max's nose twitched, his tail started to wag, and his posture changed from cautious to alert. His ears shot forward, his body tensed. And then, he ran. Jake barely had time to react before 80 pounds of German Shepherd crashed into him. He dropped to his knees just in time to catch Max as the dog lunged forward, licking his face frantically, whining and whimpering with an urgency that shattered the last 6 years of distance. Jake wrapped his arms around Max, burying his face in the dog's fur as tears spilled down his cheeks. "Hey, buddy," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I missed you so much." Max let out a deep, contented whine and pressed against Jake, refusing to let go. A few feet away, the woman who had brought him here wiped her eyes. Other soldiers, who had gathered around, stood in silence, watching the emotional reunion. Unbeknownst to Jake, someone had pulled out their phone and started recording. The moment was too powerful not to capture. The raw, unfiltered love between a soldier and his dog after years of separation. Jake pulled back slightly, cupping Max's face with both hands. "You remember me, huh?" he said with a teary chuckle. Max let out a happy bark. And just like that, they were home again. What started as a quiet moment of reunion between a soldier and his dog quickly turned into something much larger. The emotional video, taken by one of the soldiers who witnessed Jake and Max's reunion, was uploaded to social media without anyone thinking much of it. It was just a raw, heartfelt moment captured on film. Max's joyful bark, the way Jake's eyes welled up as he hugged his dog, the unspoken bond between them that transcended words. It was all there. No one expected it to go viral, but it did. Within hours, the video spread like wildfire. It was shared by military pages, animal rescue organizations, and everyday people who had been moved by the reunion. The internet seemed to hold its breath as millions of viewers watched the heartwarming moment unfold. Comments flooded in, most of them from people who had experienced similar emotions, whether they were veterans, pet owners, or simply compassionate souls who understood the bond between humans and animals. This made me cry. The bond between a soldier and his dog is unbreakable. As a veteran myself, this brings back so many memories. Thank you for sharing this with the world. I don't even know these people, but this has made my day. Thank you for your service, and thank you to Max for always having Jake's back. Jake couldn't believe what he was seeing when he checked his phone the next day. The video had already reached millions of views. He wasn't one for attention, and yet here he was, his private moment shared with the world. His phone buzzed with notifications, his inbox flooded with messages from people he didn't know, all thanking him for sharing such an emotional story. Some people even reached out to share their own reunion stories, their experiences with lost pets, and the healing power of love. At first, Jake was overwhelmed. He hadn't planned for any of this. He hadn't even wanted the reunion to be filmed. It had been such a personal, intimate moment. But as he read through the messages and saw how many people had been moved by the video, his feelings shifted. He realized that this wasn't just about him and Max anymore. Their story had become a symbol for something greater. The sacrifices made by military personnel, the importance of animals in healing, and the power of hope. One message in particular stood out to him. It was from a woman named Sarah, who had adopted a retired military dog years ago. She wrote, "I know how much Max means to you, Jake. I had a dog just like him. I lost him too, but I know that bond never fades. Thank you for reminding us that love knows no time or distance. You gave me hope today." Jake wiped his eyes as he read the message, realizing how much the video had affected people from all walks of life. He never imagined his reunion with Max would touch so many, but now it felt like a beacon of hope for those who needed it. The video continued to spread. It was shared by celebrities, news outlets, and even military foundations. And through it all, Jake and Max stood side by side, stronger than ever, reunited not just in body but in spirit. Their story had captured the hearts of millions. Jake sat in the front seat of his truck, his hand resting on the leather seat beside him. Max, as always, was right there, his head resting on Jake's lap, eyes half closed in contentment. It felt surreal to be driving home with him, to feel the comforting weight of his old partner at his side. The years of uncertainty, the countless nights spent wondering if he would ever hold Max again, seemed to melt away with each passing mile. As they turned onto Jake's street, Max perked up, his ears twitching as he looked out the window. The house that Jake had lived in for the past few years was small but familiar. It was the place he had come back to after every mission, every deployment, but it had never felt quite like home without Max there. He had always expected to walk through the door with Max by his side, but the years apart had left an aching emptiness that only now, finally, felt like it was being filled. Jake parked the truck, his heart racing with anticipation. The front door swung open as he stepped out, and there, standing on the porch, was his neighbor, Lisa. She had always known about Max, had seen the pictures Jake used to show her, heard the stories about his brave dog. When Jake had left for his last deployment, Lisa had looked after Max's dog bowl, promising to feed him if he ever came back. Now, as Jake walked toward her with Max, she couldn't contain the tears that welled up in her eyes. "You brought him home," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Jake smiled, the kind of smile that came from a deep, unspoken sense of relief. "Yeah, I did." Max, ever the social one, trotted forward and nudged Lisa's leg, wagging his tail. Lisa bent down to scratch him behind the ears, her smile widening as Max licked her hand. It was as if no time had passed at all. The connection between Max and Jake was undeniable, but seeing Max interact so comfortably with the people in Jake's life reminded him that the love of a service dog wasn't confined to just one person. Max had given everything for Jake, and now in return, he was going to be a part of a new chapter for both of them. Later that evening, Jake sat on the porch with Max curled up beside him. The sky above was a wash of oranges and purples as the sun set. Jake glanced down at his dog, running a hand through Max's fur, feeling the gentle rhythm of his breathing. For the first time in years, Jake felt truly at peace. Max was home. It wasn't just a homecoming for the two of them. It was the beginning of something new. There was so much healing to be done. But Jake knew that with Max by his side, they could face anything together. This was the beginning of their second chance. This story is more than just a reunion. It's a reminder of the loyalty and sacrifices made by military dogs. If this story moved you, consider supporting organizations that reunite veterans with their service dogs. Every soldier deserves to bring their best friend home. Share this story to spread awareness.